Masechet Nedarim, Daf Kaf Gimel. We begin with a couple of more stories about different people that need to undo their vows. And then we're going to get to the next Mishnah, which is when someone makes a declaration prior to him making a vow, saying the vow that I'm going to make will be null and void. How does that work? All right, we just saw a story where Rabbi Shimon made a neder and he went to the rabbis and they kept trying to find a petach, an opening, and said, did you have this in mind? And he said, yes, I had all these things in mind, until they went from shade to sun and sun to shade and they gave up on him. And then Botnit said, well, would you have made a vow had you known that you would give the rabbi so much trouble? And he said, no, then I would not have made the vow. And based on that, they were able to absolve the vow. We see next a similar case. Rabbi Ishmael bar Rabbi Yosef Havale Nidre Mishra. This Rabbi Ishmael had a vow that he wanted to dissolve. Atale Kamayhu Drabanan. So he came to the sages. Amru le nadart adata dehachi. Amar lehu in. He said, did you have the following in mind? That when you made the vow, right? When you said, I'm not going to have sugar, did you have in mind this salad dressing that actually does have sugar in it? He says, yes, I had that in mind. I knew that it has sugar and I made the neder anyway. They asked him another thing. Did you have this next thing in mind? He says, yes, I had that in mind also. I covered all the bases. And they went through this many times. Now over here, that's all we have in this version. In the Vatican manuscript, it has here that they went from sun to shade and shade to sun. In other words, this section that was misplaced before, it was just a double in the previous story. And what was it doing there? Why double something for nothing? Actually, what probably happened is that this section belonged in our story, and somehow it was just simply written in the wrong spot in the printed edition. So that probably explains why it's doubled here, because we do in fact have a similar story where it does belong. All right, from they went to sun to shade and shade to sun, if we stick that in here. And eventually, a certain launderer, a commoner, laundryman, saw what was going on. That the rabbis are getting all exasperated. They're trying all day long to find some kind of opening, something that this Rabbi Ishmael didn't think of when he made the vow. Unforeseen circumstance. And so this launderer got so upset at Rabbi Ishmael for bothering the rabbis, so to protect their honor, he took some launderer's tool and hit Rabbi Ishmael on the head. We're not sure what this is, but it could be something like this, a strainer. This looks like it's pretty hard, wrought iron metal. That might hurt a bit. All right, and so he hit Rabbi Ishmael on the head. And then, Amar, Adata de mache li kasra la nadri v'sharye lenafshe. Then Rabbi Ishmael had an idea, got knocked into his head. He says, oh, had I known that because of the vow that I made, eventually I would get hit on the head by this launderer, then I never would have made the vow. And based on that, he was able to dissolve his vow. This could mean he dissolved his own vow. There is a problem of a person dissolving his own vow, so this could mean that he found a way to dissolve his vow that he suggested to the rabbis, who then dissolved his vow. So again, another funny, ironic story that the very effort to the failed effort to absolve the vow was itself the opening that they used to undo the vow, because they got hit on the head. All right, now we have a question on the story. Amar le Ravacha bedifti le Ravina, Hai noladhu delama sekadata demachele kasra vetanena en potrin lo benolad. Says we have a problem with this petach in that it's nolad. Here's the concept. Nolad means something, a totally new circumstance that no one, even in their any imagination, would have conceived of. And so in this case, there's no possible way that anyone would have conceived the idea that when I made the vow, I would eventually come to try to undo it, bother the rabbis, and then some launderer, overhearing what would happen, would come hit me on the head. And there's a general rule that when we look for an opening, it has to be something that is within the realm of normal possibility that a person should have thought of. So in the sugar example that I'm not not going to eat sugar, people, you should know that there's desserts in sugar, there's desserts in food, there's sugar in food, there's sugar in salad dressing, right? People know that there's sugar in all these things, and therefore they could have been aware of it. And the fact that they didn't think of that circumstance and they made the vow anyway, that would be a good reason to say they made the vow under false pretenses. But if it's a very far-fetched possibility that a person, someone would come and say, "Did you know you would get some disease? And because of this disease, you'd have to take this pill that has some sugar in it." That is such a remote possibility that you cannot use that. Of some rare disease, whatever, and you'd have to have this item that has sugar in it. So therefore, no one would possibly even imagine that item, and therefore, since it's so far-fetched, we don't consider that to be taking the vow under false pretenses, because no one would have imagined such a thing. So here too, that's the problem, right? They asked him all kinds of regular questions, but you can't use this nolad, this new circumstance. How often does it happen that a launderer comes and hits you on the head because he's upset at you? This is not something that anyone would predict, and so it's not a valid reason to undo the vow. Amar le, so this was Rav Acha's question. He asked Ravina, and Ravina responded, Hai lav noladhu teshichichi apikore de mesare rabanan. This is not so uncommon, because we always find that there are heretics, like apikore, maybe it comes from Apikorsim, Epicurus, the famous Greek philosopher that the rabbis did not like very much. There's always people that are mocking the rabbis, and they come, even hit them over the head. That, although it's a somewhat remote possibility, it is within the realm of imagination, and therefore is not called nolad. Next story. Debitu d'Abaye havala hahi berata. The wife of Abaye had a daughter, probably from a previous marriage. She was earlier married to Rav Chisda and then married to Abaye. So she had this daughter. Hu amar likrivai, he amara likriva. Abaye said, I want her to be married to one of my relatives. She's a great catch. I want one of my cousins or someone to marry her on my side. And she says, no, I want her from someone on my side of my family, one of my cousins. So now they're fighting over this. Who's going to get to marry this daughter of Abaye's wife? And then finally, the Abaye made a vow. Amala titasra hanaati alach yabat adatai uminasebat la lekribach. He vows that any of a benefit from me will be prohibited to you if you go against my view and you marry her to one of your relatives. Right? If you go ahead and marry her off to one of your relatives, then you can have no benefit from me. All right, so that once that vow is in place, that's pretty strong, and she's probably would be scared, and they're going to have a problem in their own marriage, and so she's not going to do it. But she was strong-willed, and she didn't listen to this vow. Azlat v'havart adate, she went against his command, avanseba likriba, and she married her daughter off to one of her relatives anyway. Atale kamed Rav Yosef. Now Abaye after that actually felt bad. He didn't want to divorce his wife. He didn't want to be in a fight with her forever. So he wanted to undo the vow. Amar le ilu havayadat da'avart adatach u'minasba la likriva mi adarata. Rav Yosef said, had you known that she would go against your, defy your will, and she would marry off her daughter to her own relative, would you have ever made the vow? Right? Would you have wanted to actually separate from your wife if she had married off her daughter to her own relative? Amar le'la, he says, no, I never would have made the vow had I known that she would violate. I thought that once I said that would scare her, and then she would let it go, and I would marry her off to my relative. So I didn't want actually to go through with the threat. Svesharieh Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said, oh, since you never wanted that and you wouldn't have made the vow had you known, therefore it's permitted, and he was able to absolve the vow in that way. Okay, that's super interesting. This, by the way, is different from the case in the previous Mishnah, which was when he says, I'm not going to sell this for less than 4. But in that case, you don't even have to absolve the vow, because even at the time that he said it, he knew he was going to sell it for less than 4. Saying, I promise I'm not going to sell it for less than 4 coins, is a way of saying, I'll sell it for 3. Because that's the normal way of negotiation. Whereas here, at the time that he said the vow, he really thought that his wife is not going to defy his will, and so the vow would be binding. The vow would be binding, but the condition would not be triggered. Now that the condition was triggered, he was surprised. Now, it's not like a nolad; it's not a total surprise. It's within the realm of possibility that one could think that this would happen. But had he known that she actually would go against his will, he would not have made the vow. And therefore, he does not mean it. He didn't mean it, and we can undo it. Okay, now we ask, are you allowed really to undo a vow like this? And we say, it's a kind of surprising thing, because I said, if this, then I'll want to make this vow. And then that happens. Well, how did you know that the trigger would happen? Then you would have made the vow. So this is, you can almost undo any vow like this. So can we do such a thing? V'hatanya. מעשה באדם אחד שהדיר את אשתו מלעלות לרגל ועברה על דעתו ועלתה לרגל. So he says, indeed you can. Here's a braita that shows a similar case and is valid to undo a vow in this way. A certain person vowed that his wife should not go and make aliyah on the holiday, to go to Jerusalem on Pesach or Sukkot. He didn't want her to go, so he makes a vow that you'll be prohibited to me if you go. And she decided, I'm going anyway. She wants to be in Yerushalayim for the holiday. ועברה דעתו ועלתה לרגל. ובא לפני רבי יוסי, אמר לו, ואילו היית יודע, שעוברת על דעתך ועולה לרגל כלום הידרת? Rabbi Yosef asked the husband, if you had known that your wife would defy your will and go make aliyah on the holiday, would you have made this vow and made her prohibited to you? He said, Amar lo, v'tiro Rabbi Yosef. And the husband said, no, I never would have made the vow if I really thought she was going to go through with it. I thought it was just using it to scare her. I didn't think she was going to do it. I don't want to be prohibited to her. And so, based on that, Rabbi Yosef permitted it. So that's in exactly the same case where someone triggered the very vow that he made on the condition. That condition was triggered, but then he realized he doesn't actually want the consequences to go through, and therefore it's null and void. Okay, this is a really interesting story because the making aliyah laregel. Usually, when we think of that, we think of the Bet HaMikdash is there, and you make aliyah laregel, and you bring korbanot, sacrifices, and it's a very nice thing. Whoever heard of making aliyah laregel, going to Jerusalem on the holiday after the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed? But this case is talking about Rabbi Yosef, a Tana. So this is a Tana who lives after the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed. So what kind of aliyah laregel is there? And the answer is, this is a great proof that there is a mitzvah to go to Jerusalem on the holidays, even when there's no Bet HaMikdash. Nowadays, you're going to go and you're going to pray there and learn Torah there and be part of the people and celebrate. So that itself is a mitzvah. So this is a wonderful source for going to Jerusalem even today. All right, that ends those series of wonderful stories and really bring to life what vows were all about and how people often, probably usually, felt bad that they made the vow in the first place. Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, אף הרוצה להדיר את חברו שיאכל אצלו, יאמר לו, כל נדר שאני עתיד לדור הוא בטל, ובלבד שיהיה זכור בשעת הנדר. Rabbi Eliezer is going to add another case, af also, someone who wants to make a vow against his friend in order to encourage that friend to come eat with him, right? You better come and eat with me now, right? Come and join me for a meal, or else I'm going to prohibit you from ever coming into my house again. Something like that. So if he says that, but he doesn't really want to make such a vow, he wants to say something that will encourage his friend, but he doesn't act. If his friend doesn't come, he doesn't want the consequence of then he's never going to be able to come in again. So what should he do? He should say beforehand, any vow that I'm going to make will be canceled. So he should go, the day before, or right before, and maybe tell someone else, a different friend, hey, listen, tomorrow, I know this guy's going to come. I'm going to need to make this vow, but I'm telling you right now, I don't mean it. And then that way, later on, when he makes the vow, it will be null and void. But this only works that he remembers at the time of the neder that he had or made this declaration, moda'ah, you can call it, a declaration that the vow that I'm going to make is null and void. If you remember that while he made the vow, then it's valid. Okay, that's the simple reading of the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to have some problems with the simple reading and is going to end up splitting it into two cases here. And it's also going to be end up changing these words at the bottom, at the end, that he remembers to not remember. Okay, so let's see how the Gemara analyzes it. Since the host said, any neder I'm going to make will be canceled, the Gemara now is assuming that when he says that declaration, he's saying it in front of the guest, right? So he's telling the guest, come in, come have a meal with me. And then the guest says, no, I'm not hungry now. I'm not going to come now. And then the host says, listen, I'm about to make a vow, but the vow I'm about to make is null and void. And I make a vow that you must come now, or else you can never come in here again. So if that's the case, then the guest is not going to listen to him and is not going to come in, because he just heard the host say that he doesn't mean the vow that he's about to make. So in that case, it would be no point in the host making the vow if he just said out loud that he's not going to make it. Now, a simple solution to this is not that he said the nullification declaration in front of the guest, but rather he said it beforehand. He said to his wife, listen, this guy's coming, I'm going to make a vow, but I'm not going to mean it. All right, then that would make sense. But the Gemara doesn't understand it that way. Instead, the Gemara is going to split the Mishnah into actually two different cases as follows. If a person wants, the host wants a guest to come over, and the guest is refusing, and the host makes a vow, says you better come, or else I make a vow that you can never come again, that is called a neder of exhortation, of encouragement, similar to the one we had before. This is the same category as the one that you're making a negotiation on the price, and therefore that does not need to be nullified at all. Okay, even though this is not the obvious explanation of the Mishnah, could be that the Gemara is going through this exercise on purpose in order to actually disagree with the Mishnah. According to the Mishnah, the result would be that if a host wanted to make a vow of encouragement for his guest, he would actually have to make a declaration beforehand that it's going to be null and void. If he did make that declaration, then sounds like the vow would be binding. Not quite the same as the negotiation where everybody knows that you say that, and this one might be different because it does put them together, right? Because if it's all one halacha, then it's not null and void. So it could be that the Gemara wants to be lenient on that host, and even if he doesn't make a declaration, it's still null and void because that's the way people talk. Everybody knows you don't mean it when you make such a vow, and so therefore separates it into two halachot. So I think that's why it asks this question, even though there's a more obvious answer, because it actually wants to get to this response and this new reading. Okay, so that's halacha 1, that a host can say such a vow, and it's already, everyone knows it's he doesn't mean it, and it's null and void. A second halacha, and in general, if you want to be able to make some certain vows all year long, and you don't want them to be fulfilled, right? Even not those types of vows of negotiation. What you should do is on Rosh Hashanah every year stand up and say, all vows that I will make throughout the coming year should be null and void. And then you don't have to worry about all the vows that we make. And this is, in fact, the source, number one, for Kal Nidre, not Rosh Hashanah, but Yom Kippur, the vows that we make, and also the Hatarat Nedarim that we do just before Rosh Hashanah. We also have a Moda'ah section at the end, declaration section that says all vows that we're going to say in the future should be null and void. That one is actually better because in the Kal Nidre, we're not saying it in front of a Beit Din, but the other one, the Moda'ah, is in front of a Beit Din. Although, according to this, doesn't necessarily have to be in front of a Beit Din. Sounds like one can just say it to a friend or even to himself. I don't mean it, because it depends on the person's mindset. And as long as you say that in the beginning of the year, so then you're set all year. Okay, good. But now the end of the Mishnah is complex because it says, as long as you remember it at the time of the Neder. When you make a Neder anytime during the year and you don't want it to be valid, you have to remember at the time you make it that back on Rosh Hashanah, I made such a declaration. And therefore, have in mind that this is null and void. Okay. So fine, you have to keep that in mind. Now Gemara is going to say, wait a second. There's a reason to say the opposite. If he remembers that he made such a declaration, and nevertheless the guy goes ahead and makes a vow, doesn't that mean that he actually wants to uproot that declaration, that condition that he made? The condition meaning, if I ever make a vow, it should be null and void. So by making a vow, then he's showing that I don't want that to have in mind, if he in fact remembers it. Usually people make a vow like out of anger, and so when he's making out of anger, he's not having in mind, I made that declaration, so the following will not be valid. Person wants it to be valid, and so by making the vow, he's undoing the declaration. So actually, it should be better if he doesn't remember that he made the declaration. So Amar Abaye, you're right. Teneh ubilbad shelo yeheh zachor b'shat haneder. Change the words of the Mishnah and add in a not. As long as he does not remember at the time that he made a declaration. In that case, then it works. If he comes and makes a vow, in anger, whatever reason, and he wasn't thinking of the Kal Nidre that he said, and then afterwards he says, I shouldn't have made that vow. Don't worry about it. You don't have to undo it. Didn't you say Kal Nidre? Oh yeah, I did say Kal Nidre. Okay, then you're good to go. So it's actually better if he doesn't remember that he made the vow than if he does remember it at the time and makes the vow anyway. Okay, this again not seem to be the simple reading of the Mishnah, but perhaps once again we want to be lenient on people, because if every time someone has to remember at the time that they make a vow that they made the Kal Nidre, then people usually don't remember that and have in mind. So this way it actually gives a blanket undoing of all vows, even if you don't remember. Okay, so that's Abaye as interpretation. However, we have one more interpretation. Rava Amar. Rava seems to say, well, you can't just change the word, add a not lav into the language of the Mishnah. Right, add the word bachelo, add the word lo. So instead, he has a different interpretation that adds a little bit of complexity to the case. Leolam kedamrinan mikara. Leave the Mishnah as it is. That you have to actually be remembering something at the time you make the vow. But what exactly do you have to remember? Hacha b'ma'askinan. Mishnah talking about the following case. Kegon sheitna beRosh Hashanah ve'lo yada b'mahitna. On Rosh Hashanah, he said, in the following year, any vow that I make regarding not drinking wine, it will be invalid, right? He makes some kind of specific condition in that initial declaration. Or he said, any vow that I make this coming year regarding bread, that bread should be prohibited, I don't want to do that, right? Because I know in my experience, I make vows like that. I want them all to be null and void. The thing is, after Rosh Hashanah, sometime during the year, he doesn't remember what he made that condition on. Did I say any vow about wine or any vow about bread? I don't remember what the condition was. So I know I made a declaration. I don't remember the contents of the declaration. And all of a sudden now, some months later, he's in a position that he's about to make a vow regarding bread, right? This bread is going to be prohibited to me. Now, izachur b'shat neder v'amad al da'ata rishona ani noded. If he remembers at the time that he's about to say, this bread should be prohibited to me, and he remembers, I made a vow about something or other, and whatever I made, that condition should apply to the following vow that I'm making now. So if I vowed about bread, those would be null and void, then what I'm about to say will be null and void. If I vowed about wine, then now I'm talking about bread, so it should go through. I just don't remember what it was, but whatever that declaration was on Rosh Hashanah, I want that to be fulfilled and continue in what I'm about to say. In that case, Nidre let be mamasha. If it turns out that he had said, he'll remember sometime later, right? Someone will remind him that he had made a vow about bread, and now he makes a vow about bread. Then it's null and void, because he already made a condition. Any vow I make during the year about bread should be null and void. Now he made a vow about bread, so it's null and void. And he had in mind that whatever he said on Shana should apply now. That is the case of the Mishnah that says as long as he remembers. So he remembered something and had in mind the condition and wanted it to apply. However, lo amar al dat harishona ni noder, akre litna'eh v'kiyem li nadre. But if he did not say, I want this to apply with taking into account what I said on Rosh Hashanah, if he doesn't say that and he just makes the vow, then that means that he's undoing the intention. Even if he said on Rosh Hashanah, I want to any vow that I make about bread should be null and void. But now, at this point, he didn't say the following vow is going to be based on that condition. Instead, he just said, this bread is prohibited to me. Then that's the case that's similar to what Abaye said. In that case, he is, by saying, this bread is prohibited to me, he's showing that he doesn't care. And he's uprooting the initial declaration he had said before. And so, therefore, his original condition, his original declaration is null, and the vow that he makes will in fact apply. And it upholds his vow. All right, so that's Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah. So he partially does agree with Abaye, partially not. Okay, Rav Huna bar Chinena savar lemidreshe bepirka. Rav Huna really liked this the statement of Rava, and he said, I would like to teach this in my public lecture. A pirka comes from the word perik, right, meaning a certain section, whatever section of Torah, or whatever they're teaching, or Mishnah. And these were big public lectures. The rabbis often had small classes. They would bring their students and they would study together in the small group. And when the small group was a very high level study, but then on Shabbatot and on holidays, the rabbi would gather in the whole public, including their students, including sages and commoners. Everybody would come to the pirka, and anything that the sage said at the pirka would be publicized as halacha l'maaseh. It was official. Kind of like Rav Avadia Yosef, when he gave on Saturday nights at Yazdin, he would give these lectures. They were a combination of Agadah and halacha. The Pirka also was a combination of Agadah and halacha. You want to bring the masses in. And anything that Chacham Avadia would say in those lectures would be halacha l'maaseh. You can go quote them, right? He said in the lecture, not like he was just talking, with colleagues. And so therefore, Rav Huna said, I would like to establish this as the official halacha and announce this law in public. Amar le Rava, but Rava told him, Tana kamastim la satume, kedesh lo yinhagu kalot rosh bendarim, ve'at arash le bepirka. Rava told Rav Huna, no, do not announce this in public. The Tana, the author of our Mishnah, concealed this law so that the public would not treat vows lightly. And you're going to go and announce it in public? Okay, what is he talking about? It seems not to be talking about this specific case that Rava mentioned, which is an unusual case and wouldn't come up often, but rather the basic halacha of the Mishnah, that if you want your Nedarim in the future to be null and void, just say at the beginning of the year, any Neder that I will make will be null and void. Right? We the Chassid Mechsara added the words in, right, that you could do this once a year and say on Rosh Hashanah, all my vows for the future will be null and void. Do not tell the public that they can do this, Because if you tell them, they're going to be like, oh yeah, what a great idea. And then every Joe Schmo will just go on Rosh Hashanah, say all my vows for the year are null and void. And then all year long, they're going to be making vows and cursing and promising and threatening and all that to their wives, to their business partners, to everybody. And this is a very bad thing because we don't want people to treat vows lightly. It's not a proper thing to do. And therefore, don't say this in public. It's in the Mishnah, but the Mishnah just said it in a very quick way. It didn't say that you do this once a year forever, right? It just gave like one little example. We're the ones that just elaborated on it. If you do it once a year, and then do you have to remember it or not remember it? So therefore, this is for the sages. If the person is responsible and knowledgeable and will treat it correctly, okay, you can use, it is a valid strategy, but not to be taught in public. All right, this is fascinating. There will be some halachot that the rabbis would keep private and not teach to the public. Also, it's interesting that even though this is actually in the Mishnah, this shows that the Mishnah was meant for the sages to study. It was not necessarily something that everyone was expected to study, or if they did, the rabbis would be teaching it to them and explaining it to them. But when they explained it, they didn't always reveal all of the secrets in it, right? The Mishnah contains secrets that the sages know, and then they explain to those who would benefit from the explanation. But sometimes better for the entire public not to know something. And in that case, he told them, no, do not teach this in the Pirkah. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.